Right.
I can get a general idea of what I'm going to do.
Cool. Cool. All right. So this week, we're going to talk about UV mapping, and we're going to talk about textures in detail. Hopefully, things have gone well for your project over the course of the last week. From the projects that we just looked at in class, things are looking pretty good. So let's start talking about what we need to do to really start texturing this bad boy. Because when we start looking at larger objects like building, the texturing process changes ever so slightly. Over the last, 5 or 6 weeks, we've been really using Photoshop as the central hub of our entire texturing pipeline. Well, that changes today. We're no longer going to be using Photoshop, or the inclusion of Photoshop at this stage of the texturing workflow is going to change. Okay, it's going to change, and we want it to change, because the system that we've been working with over the last couple of weeks is really something, and only a system that we'd want to work with for props, set pieces, things that are much, much smaller. We can very easily pack all of the UV islands for the entirety of that object inside of our UV map quickly, right? I have a couple hundred UV islands for this guy, right? If I was to do, if I was to try to pack all of those UV islands inside of one UV map, it just wouldn't be enough, right? The amount of pixels that I would be able to devote within the texture for one of my little wood beams would be like 2 pixels. Okay, let me show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so this is the problem that we have to work around when we start working with large, complex objects like this. All right, so let's just go over to UV, and I'm using the version of my project file that already has the UVs done, and I brought this in just to kind of illustrate the madness that is UV maps on large projects. Okay, this is pretty much everything in the entirety of my scene. Every little bit here has been UV'd. This is what would happen if we tried to pack all of these UVs into the positive UV quadrant of our UV grid. Check it out. So let's say it's probably going to crash Moto, by the way. I'm just going to warn you guys now. Let's just do pack UVs. And I don't want to stretch. Yeah, actually, I kind of do want them to stretch. Go. Let's see. It's going to, wait for it. Yeah. Okay, there it is. So there's every single UV packed inside of my positive UV quadrant. And it's real easy to see. Whoops, excuse me. I accidentally hit undo. There we go. It's real easy to see certain parts of my map in here. You can kind of pick them out from the crowd. Obviously, these are the roofs. Okay, these big pieces in here. And then I have a bazillion of these guys chilling inside of my UV map. These are all the little wood beams that travel around the entirety of my object. Okay, and I have a bunch of them, and I mean a bunch of them. Okay, if I was to bring this image over into Photoshop, what would be the process of working and managing all of these separate all these separate pieces inside of Photoshop? It would be madness. It would be absolute madness, right? Because I have a couple hundred pieces in here. Some of them extraordinarily small. I mean, look at the size of some of these pieces in here. I mean, they're itty bitty. They're important UVs, okay? Got to have them. They're just teeny, 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 tiny, right? Texturing that would be near impossible, okay? One other thing. Over in Photoshop, this is going to be, what we see here is the exact dimensions of the texture file that we're going to be working with over in Photoshop, right? In Photoshop, that's an entirely pixel-based environment, right? We're going to have to bring in some photographs that would define maybe some of these boards. Are you really going to understand, just based on the conclusion of your texture, what that looks like with the boards? Probably not, because there's only going to be maybe 3 or 4 pixels going up vertically and maybe 10 or 12 pixels going horizontally to define a single board. That's not a lot of information, okay? Let's see if we can find that board. I'm not going to go through the process of defining all of these elements, but let's see if we can figure out where that board is on my model, and we're going to texture just that one board using our traditional pipeline. So, okay, so let's just remember that it's this long, skinny guy going down the right-hand side of my map. So let's export my UVs. We'll just put it on we'll just call this test. And and we'll open that over in Photoshop. Oops, excuse me. Let's just see what we get here. I'm not going to bake anything because it's just really not going to work. And I don't want to spend time illustrating something that is just fundamentally not going to work. So let's open this EPS in good old Photoshop. We'll rasterize it down to 1024 by 1024. Of course, the mode's going to go to RGB. All right. And let me just travel over to CG Textures real fast and find a tiling texture for some wood planks. Maybe. Hello, Internet. There we go. Go to wood. And I think if I remember correctly, it's either in rough. I think it's under rough. There's some really good, yeah, here's some good tiling textures that we can use for rough. Let's just grab that one. This is a good one. And I gotta log in. Hold on a second. Choosing to not share my login information with you guys. Not that you guys would jump in on my stuff. You guys would never do that. Do I know my login information? Of course, if you're watching the live stream of this, you're totally getting it all. Yeah. At the very least, my username, the password, obviously. Hopefully, you won't be able to figure out. Oh no, have I just challenged everyone to figure out my password? Hopefully not. Maybe, yeah. It's like, dude, Pat, your problem. I want to use this one because it's square. This is a good one. Tiling texture, just downloaded it to my desktop. Let's go back over into Photoshop and incorporate that tiling texture into my texturing workflow. Here we go. Excellent. And I'm just going to hold the Shift key and drag and drop that tile into my Photoshop texture. Okay, so let's just kind of go through our workflow here. Oops, just moved my UVs. Didn't mean to do that. All right, and let's see. Let's apply our layer style to our UVs once again, just so I can get a really quick outline of where it is. And it looks like I'm darn near close. Now, of course, you guys are probably remembering that in order for this entire illusion to take place, we need to scale down the texture reference, the actual wood photograph, so that the details of that object roughly matches the size and proportion of the object that we're mapping it onto. So I need to make it smaller. There we go. All right, so that's about the right size that I want to use. Let me save this out as a PNG, bring it back over into Modo, and we'll just take a look-see at what's going to happen to our texture, okay? It's important that you guys realize and see this entire process unfold in front of you, because I think only when you see it, you'll understand, oh, wait a minute, the old way of approaching textures on complex objects like this isn't necessarily going to work. All right. All right. Okay, so earlier we drew focus to that board right there. Now, does that board look good? No, looks horrible. Looks horrible. It is bad, bad, bad. Why? Yeah, it's populating a very, very small portion of our UV map, so we don't have a lot of pixels to describe the details of that object. This is bad. Just look at the quality of the texture applied to that beam there. It's just really bad. It's all blurry, it's pixelated, it's low resolution. This is a problem. This is a big problem for us. The solution to our problem is tiling textures. When working with complex objects and high detail objects like this, we want to begin to walk away from Photoshop and really start to use the tiling texture system that's found in a lot of different applications. Modo, of course, supports it, I think, quite beautifully, to really drive the entire texturing of our object. Okay. In many ways, we're going to stop using Photoshop and start relying upon the materials that we assign to our objects to determine how they're going to look within the scene itself. These UVs still play a critically important role within inside of this entire process, but instead of the Photoshop texture defining what and how it's going to apply the image, the material is really going to be the driver for this. So we're going to organize our entire scene here through a whole series of materials. We're not going to have one texture file like we have in the past. We're going to have maybe 8 or 9 smaller ones. So instead of one 1K texture file that's 1024 pixels by 1024 pixels, we're going to have maybe 8 or 9 smaller textures. Okay, small ones like 256 by 256. These smaller textures will then become recyclable elements within our scene. Instead of having to have a unique texture file for every single asset in our scene, we can start applying these global materials that include a texture file to many different types of objects within inside of our Unity scene file here shortly. Okay? So what we're doing is that we're kind of taking away some local control over how our images are going to look, and we're starting to think globally. On big objects like buildings, we have to think globally. We have to think about the role of the texture in relationship to the role of the we have to think the role of the tiling texture system in relationship to the Photoshop-centric system that we've been practicing over the last 5 or 6 weeks. So this is a big departure from what we're normally used to be, or the system that we're normally used to work with. Okay? Does everyone kind of see the benefits, or not necessarily the benefits, but the problems with the existing system on this model? Kind of see it? Your images are just going to be super low res. They're going to be blurry. They're going to be all pixelated on the actual 3D geometry itself. Okay?
What if you just made more UV maps and divide things?
Right, you could do that. So there is a strategy here that we have to employ. However, the more high-resolution textures, the more memory is going to be used in our game. So there's an optimization thing that we have to kind of go back and forth within. Is this something that we want to use for every single part of our object? No. Okay? We still want to be able to locally control certain details of our object. Those get their own texture file on their own UV map. Okay? However, you're going to find next week that how we structure our scene is going to absolutely determine how and what we can do with this model over in our game engine. Okay? So let's kind of jump in and start looking at this tiling texture workflow that's really going to make this whole thing shine. I want to revert back to my original project file here. Yes. All. There we go, and now we're back. And let me just turn off my lovely trackball rotation. No, and I'm also going to turn the gradient off. I'm also going to turn the work plane and the grid off. Okay, there we go. Just want to see my model chilling at the origin of my scene. Let's examine the UVs here for a second. I got a bunch of them. I got a bazillion of them, actually. And I wanted to start today's conversation by talking about the strategy for unwrapping and generating UV islands for the totality of this object. Because there's a lot going on in here, and there needs to be an intelligent thought process that defines this production process that we need to employ to do this correctly. Okay? The process of generating the UVs is no different than any other UVs that you've created up until now. Project from view, UV unwrap, fantastic tools that we can use to quickly define a whole series of UV islands within inside of our scene. But I want to start talking about the role of proportion and scale of these UV islands in relationship to each other. So I'm going to create a new UV map here so I don't mess up all these pieces. And I want to use this new UV map as the impetus of a conversation that we need to have about proportion and scale. This, in many ways, has to do with workflow, how we approach the stages of UV mapping. Okay? So the first part of our workflow, the first thing that we're going to do is that we just need to get some UVs. Okay? But we're going to isolate, and we're going to do this intelligently. We're just not going to plug our headphones in and just hit some buttons, and a couple hours later, boom, have all of our UVs. We want to intelligently approach this process to ensure that what we're getting is going to be accurate and the best high-quality result the first time we create it. All right. Let me create a new map here. We'll call this Pat's second try. There we go. And we're going to start anew. All right. Okay, so let's do this. The first thing that I'm going to do is that I want to take every single polygon within inside of my scene, and I'm going to assign it to one material. One. Okay? One material. And this is going to be, I always call it my test material, because it's really important that I be able to test the quality of my UVs as I'm making them. Okay? This is a problem, or this is something that I wish more people would do. We want to make sure that as we're making them, as we're generating our UVs, that they're distortion-free. Your mind is going to be focused on one specific piece. Make sure that piece is perfect before you move on to the next. Okay? Be easier for your brain. So this test material is just a placeholder. Okay? That's all it really is. We're going to get rid of it later on. So we'll just call it test. There we go. And I got some other materials that I pre-baked in here, so we'll just kind of put those away. And as you would imagine, inside of the test material, I'm going to apply the my favorite UV checker that comes with the preset library. So I have my material group selected inside of my shader tree. And if I navigate through my material preset library, I think, oh, what is it? It's in materials, and then it's in miscellaneous, I believe. Oh, wait, hold on a sec. Oh, no. Oh, no. They've changed it. Am I in the right section? Hold on a sec. Oh, I hate it when they change things. It's definitely not in Enhanced Moto Textures. Fabric, fur, glass, lights, metal, occlusion, organic. Wouldn't be an organic. Miscellaneous? No.
Actually not under the materials, but under items.
Items. Items. I don't even have items. Images. Images. UV. Now these are all the UV maps. Yeah, these are all the maps themselves. These are the images that are applied to it. But where is the texture preset here? Hold on a second. Now I'm invested in this. What has changed? Should be materials. Well, someone has accidentally nuked my studio? No. Stone, solid, sculpting, rubber, plastic, painted perhaps? No. Oh, well, this is frustrating. Oh, I hate when people change things. Okay. Okay, well, it looks like I'm going to have to do it the old school way and use that images section that Dylan was referencing a minute ago. I don't like that. Okay, so let's just apply my Moto UV checker into my preset. There we go. And let's start rocking and rolling. Of course, we need to dial in the texture locator first. We still need to just ensure that the projection type is set to UV map. In the second try, the correct UV map is being loaded into that scene. Now, my material went green, so maybe I don't like it to be green, or, oh, excuse me, the texture is making it green. So that's okay. I can deal with that for the time being. That's no biggie, because we're going to isolate. One thing, if you don't like the green, you can just temporarily turn the material group off and then go from there. Okay. I'm going to start isolating my scene, and I want to try to tackle the big pieces first here. Let's do the back of the house. Let's do all this stuff. So Shift-H. Okay, here's the house. So let's start talking about workflow. Give me some strategies here that we can employ to very, very quickly generate UV islands for this part of my building. Which tool would give us the best results quickly? Project from view. Absolutely. I'm a big fan of project from view. And I'm just going to do it one wall at a time. Now, if you'd like, I can show you another way of doing it. Control-Shift-A, project from view, clicky-click. Okay. Now, remember, whenever you generate UVs, it doesn't matter if you're using project from view or UV unwrap, the computer is automatically going to place those new UV islands where? You got it. You got it. Absolutely right. In the center of the positive UV quadrant, right? I'm going to be making a lot of UVs. A lot. So what should I do here? I mean, that part's going to get pretty crowded pretty quickly. Just move them away. Okay? You're allowed in the texturing, the tiling texturing workflow, we don't care about the placement of these UVs in relationship to the grid like we did earlier. Okay? We can put them wherever we want. So try to find places within inside that environment on the left that you can kind of collect UV islands together in kind of groups. I always kind of organize them. So like all the UV islands for this part of my model, I'm going to try to generally keep together in an area just so it's organized, just so my brain can organize it a little bit better. Okay, so I want to move them out of the way. Let's just move them. Whoop. Okay, and then we'll move on to the next one. Control-Shift-A, oops, Control-Shift-A, there it is. Project from view, boom, grab it, move on to the next one. Okay, rinse and repeat. Let me show you one small addition. This back one is a perfect example of where to use project from view. It's just very flat. Okay, but let me show you something else here. This is food for thought. We have all of these lovely polygons cruising around the outside of this wall, but we also have these polygons on the inside of the window. Do we need them to be separate pieces? I don't know. We could certainly make them all one connected piece if we were to just change the application of our UV mapping tools. If I grab these guys, do Shift-H to hide everything else, okay? Instead of doing project from view, what I could do if I wanted to have all of these interior polygons automatically be connected to the base of this outside wall is just use a little UV unwrap. You just pop out the corners like this. There we go. Let's see what we get. Unwrap tool now, click and drag, and there it is. It's all one piece. They're all connected to each other. Now, UV Unwrap does historically a really fantastic job of distorting and automatically kind of putting these things at an angle, which is kind of frustrating. So it does kind of include a couple extra mouse clicks in there, but we're able to get everything connected at creation. I didn't go in afterwards. Oops, excuse me. I didn't go in afterwards and do a project from view on each one of these cubes. UV Unwrap, with some very specific and pointed edge selections, allows us to generate the UVs with all of its connected pieces the first time. So I selected the corners. These guys in here. Those guys, okay? Whenever you're trying to figure out which edges to select, always think of this kind of like where you're cutting a cardboard box, okay? In my mind, whenever I'm making UVs, my mind always goes back to a cereal box, okay? I'm trying to pop all the corners, all the glued edges of a cereal box, and lie that cereal box flat on a plane. I need to figure out which corners I need to pop off, which corners I need to cut and then bend. Once I figure that out, that usually leads me to which edges I need to select, okay? So it really is, in my mind, I see like a knife, like a box cutter, and I'm slicing those parts of my cardboard box so I can rotate and bend them around these areas in here. It takes a little bit of getting used to. Admittedly, it's kind of like working in the matrix. After a while, you just see the code, okay? Your brain gets programmed to see what it needs to see. All right, now I know that I didn't do all the pieces surrounding this part of my mesh. We do have some additional elements in here that we need to connect in. So let's talk for a second how we could quickly do the remainder of these windows, because I got a bunch of them that I didn't initially UV map when I was trying to accomplish the outside wall. So let's talk about how we could use them. Now, project from view on something like these windows, they're going to give us good results, okay? However, there's like 12 polygons here that I need to do, right? That's a lot of projecting from viewing. I just made something up. It's funnier in my mind. It's a lot of clicks. It's a lot of clicks, having to select the polygon, Control-Shift-A, project from view, select the polygon, Control-Shift-A, project from view. That's a lot of the exact same thing over and over and over again. UV unwrap is your guy, okay? The unwrap tool will allow us to instantly disconnect all these pieces together in one snap, okay? So it's a really fantastic, fantastic tool when presented with a whole lot of little pieces like this. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back to my edge selection mode, and I'm very going to carefully and quickly just select all these corner pieces. That way, all of these individual polygons will be popped apart in their own separate UV island. Okay, so remember, whatever edge we select, that's the edge that's going to be sliced, okay? So that's where it's going to be physically cut. So I'm going to cut here, and I'm also going to cut on the alternating side over there. So with that said, the unwrap tool should give me 12 individual pieces in one click. Okay, I like that. I like that. Is there some work left to be done to get these connected to their parent outside wall UV islands? Yeah, absolutely. But we saved ourselves some problems here, or some time, by using unwrap to generate the pieces first. All right, so let's just get things dialed here real fast. It won't take too long to get all these things connected to each other. So I'll select, and then I'll select one of the edges for the outside of the windows. Okay, select one. And then our move and sew tools. Remember these guys from long ago? They're going to allow us to connect all these UV islands to each other. I know whenever I was first learning how to work with these move and sew tools, the labels of the tools were a little bit confusing to me. I really wasn't confident as to what their role was and how they were influencing what I was seeing inside of my UV map. So help me out. What do all these move and sew tools do? Specifically, unselected, averaged, and selected. Yeah?
Selected, doesn't it snap what you're selecting to its counterpart?
You got it. You got it. So really, in my mind, what these are doing is that they're telling me what's going to move. Okay? Let me show you what I'm talking about, or which UV island is going to move at the conclusion of this move and sew operation. Check it out. So right now, I have this edge selected. How do I know that it's selected? Yeah, it's orange. It's orange. That's the default rollover selection highlight color inside of Modo. Okay, and you can see that we have an unselected edge over here. Right? That's the same edge, but on a different polygon. Right? So watch what happens when I choose selected. Boom. Now what happened? What moved? Yeah, one of the two polygons that I had selected, and specifically, the element that moved was the unselected polygon, right? The selected edge stayed where it was, okay? And that's how I think of it. That's how I approached. The selected edge stayed in its current location inside of my UV map, and the unselected element moved to it. Let's do it again. Select another edge down here on my wall. I'll hit selected inside of move and sew. And the unselected UV island is the one that's going to be moved. Boom. And then we can just very quickly just go through. Boom. Boom. And plug all these in together. You may be able to do them at the same time. Let's see. Fail. No way. All right. Now, if we did averaged opposed to selected, what do you think is going to happen? Something stupid. That's stupid, okay? And actually what it's trying to do is moving both pieces. And it's moving both pieces to the middle point between the unselected edge and the selected edge, okay? So it's going to try to figure out the average distance between the two and move both. All right, selected, yeah. And let's see, let's just do the other one real fast since we're right here. All right. There we go. Okay, so let's turn our test material back on and take a look at the work that we've accomplished here. And we have to make some determinations here real quickly. All right, so there it is. Now this test material is your friend. Why? Why is this just an awesome material for us to use when UV mapping? What do we gain by using this test material, or any checker pattern for that matter?
See how the UVs are going to look on the mesh before you even put them on
You got it. You got it.
Yeah, the proportion you might
Proportions. Proportions. You got it. We need to try before we buy, okay? This is the most critical step in the entire process when using tiling textures. And this is the step that most people, they blow by. They ignore it because they just want to get all the UVs done, okay, quickly. You want your UVs to be dialed and perfect and as polished as you possibly can before you move on to the next set of UV islands that you have to create, okay? Because your brain's thinking about these ones here. Your brain's consuming these. You understand their shape. You understand which polygons they are. We want to get these dialed and perfect before we go on to the next one. Our checker pattern allows us to very quickly understand how close we are, how close each one of these UV islands are in scale to each other. We want all of the actual cubes within the checker pattern, the squares within the checker patterns, to be approximately the same size. Okay. Now I know what you're asking. You say, "Well, Pat, why?" Let me show you why. I'm going to give you a really extreme example here, and this example requires me to go back out onto the web and download another tiling texture real fast from CG Textures. Okay. And let's just go, I think there's a stone section here, or rock. Let's just grab, oh, no, this is definitely not it. Let me find it here real fast. I think that's where I'm, there we go, bricks, thank you. And let's just do these rounded guys. These will be easy to see. And specifically, let's grab these. I'm choosing these not because it's the right texture to place on the outside of my wall. It's just that it's going to be very easy to see the difference in scale on this texture. All right. So I've downloaded that texture. Let's load it into my test material here real fast. Add layer, image map. We'll just load in that brick round. Okay. Double check its texture locator. Yep, things are good. All right. Now let's cruise around my mesh. Yeah. Okay. You can kind of see what's happening here. Okay. If you look at the rocks on this face here, and compared to the rocks on this face, do they look like they're the same size? No. The rocks on that side of my model are much, much larger than the rocks on the other side of the wall that's perpendicular to it. That size. And that has everything to do with the size of our UV islands being different from one another. Okay? These are all different from each other. Okay, they're different sizes. The shapes are correct. All this stuff in here is just absolutely perfect. But the proportions, the scale of the UV islands in relationship to each other is off. They need to be identical. Let's really make this an extreme example here. And I'll scale this one up. There we go. All right, so now we have little rocks and big rocks. It's imperative that all of the rocks be the exact same size, right? Because these tiling textures are going to be applied globally to a lot of polygons within our scene. Okay? The material and the texture locator that's assigned to the image is now driving the placement of this image on our object, not a Photoshop document anymore. We're kind of taken out of the loop in this process. The texture locator is really responsible for figuring out how to place this image correctly onto our model. The size of our UVs is a determining factor in this entire operation. Okay? So we need to get this dialed. We need to get all of our UV maps, all of our UV islands on our UV map scaled to each other. Okay? Now there's a little bit of a process here that we have to employ. It's a visual process. Luckily for us, those checker patterns really give us an opportunity to do it quickly. In certain situations, you'll have to do this by hand. In other situations, you can use the move and sew tools to help you get a much stronger result. Okay? Let me show you what I'm talking about. I'll show you both ways. There are pros and cons of each. So let me turn off my bricks and we get our checker pattern back. All right. In certain situations, you'll just have to do it by hand, and you'll have to look critically at what the result is going to be. We want all of our walls to be roughly the exact same size, the exact same height. So we can use our little eyeballs here and try to get the height of all these walls to be identical. Something kind of right around in there, and that looks pretty good. Just using my scale tool here, and you can see that we're getting a really close result. I'm looking at the size of the squares on the actual object, and I'm just seeing if they're close to one another, and I think they are. That's a really, really great close approximation. If you think about it, if you do some deductive reasoning on the actual objects that we're working with, the walls are the exact same height going around this section of my model, right? So the UVs should also have a very similar height, okay? So that's what I was looking at when I was scaling this thing up and down like that, okay? When you're scaling your UVs, be very, very careful. Don't do this, oops, or rotate them. Don't do this. Because what happened? This stretched, and the pattern over here is stretched. They're no longer cubes. They're long, skinny rectangles on the map itself. We want to make sure that we're not distorting our UV islands as we work with them. So when you're scaling your islands here, use the coplanar handle. Scale uniformly along both the along the U and the V axes. That's the best way to work. You probably saw me also doing this. I overlap. This is just a technique that I've learned from my experience. Overlap them, and then then you can kind of see a little bit more easily when they're intersecting each other and when they're the right size. All right. So that's a way of doing it by hand. And in certain situations, you'll have to do it by hand. You have to do it by hand. However, we can also use the move and sew tools to get us where we need them to go. Check it out. I'm going to grab that edge. And why am I not seeing its corresponding edge? Because these polygons and... Oh, I see. I see. Let's, I got it backwards. This one needs to go over there. And this guy and his little friend here. All right. There we go. That's what I was looking for. So you can also use the move and sew tools to do the job for us, okay? I've selected this part of my UV island, and if I do move and sew, selected, boom. Now that other UV island was sewn to that front wall, and we can very clearly see that the detail of our texture map is uniform across the entire object itself, okay? This is a great way to get things into proportion with each other. In certain situations, you'll want to have, hold on 2 seconds, let me just get this guy out of the way. In certain situations, you'll want to have them disconnected from each other, but this is a great way just to get things into scale, and then if you need them to be disconnected, you can absolutely just move them with the tear off command activated, and then we can separate them out, okay? Some situations you'll need a seam there, or you'll need to be able to control the placement of that object inside of the UV grid to get the result that you're after, okay? But they're aligned proportionally, they're scaled proportionally to each other, and that's the big step. The pattern of all of the squares, the size of all of our squares in our checker pattern, they must be the same, okay? That way, when I apply a tiny texture like I did for my little stone pebbles there, the reproduction of those stone pebbles across the entirety of that surface is going to be uniform. It's going to be the same. There we go. Let me turn on my stone textures again. And now, check it out, that's what we're after. All the stones on the model itself are the exact same size on the actual 3D model. Okay, that's an important thing. It's critical with these tiny textures that our UVs be scaled to each other, so that when we apply these global tiling textures to many polygons, the reproduction of the details of the image map is the same. So basically, all the stones are the same size. All the wood grains are the same size. All the plaster chunks are the same size. If they're different, it can be really easy to notice that. Really obvious, really obvious, okay? Let's keep cruising. Let's keep cruising. We got some work that we have left in front of us to do, so let's do it. I generally like to have my pieces disconnected. I only connect them when I absolutely have to. All right, let's keep cruising. Let's talk about some other areas of my mesh that may prove to be some issues, that may give me some problems. Okay, let's talk about some of these boards, and we'll also talk about the house and the chimney. Okay, let's start with some of the boards first. And I'm not going to do all of these. Okay, but I am going to do a handful of them. Let's just do those front ones. Okay, so here are all the polygons that I want to focus on real fast. And let's just talk for a second how to quickly unwrap cubes. So there's the cube. How do I generate an accurate UV island for this guy the first time around? I don't want to do project from view because that's 3 clicks that I'll have to repeat 4 different times. Total 12 clicks. I want to do this in like 2. Yeah. UV unwrap. But before I hit the UV unwrap, I had to select some edges, right?
Yeah.
Which edges?
The polygon that you're hovering over right now, I would select the top and bottom edges.
Like that? Oops, excuse me. Like that?
Just one. You only need one edge.
That one?
And the bottom one.
And the bottom one? Okay.
And then either edge on the left side or.
Like that one and that one? Yeah. And then you're on your way. You're absolutely right, Waddell, and I like the way you're thinking. Whenever I work with cubes, I usually extend this a little bit. I do something that looks like this. I call it finding my C's and finding my U's, because this pattern up here at the top looks like an inverted C. Or if you're looking at it from like this way, kind of looks like a U, right? Or there's my C. So I try to find my C's and I try to find my U's. The placement of these C's and U's need to be the same, or excuse me, the orientation of these C's and U's need to be the same on both the top of the cube and on the bottom, so we have to pay a little bit of attention to this. However, the most important thing when choosing which 3 edges to select on the top of my cubes is to, the most important thing is to understand which side of my cube is going to be facing outwards, right? Which side of my cube is my audience going to see? Because in many ways here, what we are producing is going to be a seam in the tiling texture on the actual image map. Just because we're working with tiling textures doesn't necessarily mean we have to completely forget about the application and the inclusion of seams inside of our mesh. Okay, we got to be thinking about that. Where are the seams going to go? Now, on this specific piece of geometry, the edges that we have selected are probably the edges that I would select, okay? All right, because here's the piece of geometry in relationship to the rest of the model. However, if we look at the edges that we've selected, Waddell said, hey, grab that outside one. That's putting the seam on the outside of the model. If our gamer is running past this side of our model, there's a high likelihood that they're going to see it. So where should I have put the seam on this UV? On the inside. The chance of them seeing that seam go down pretty quickly when it's on the inside edge of that object. So I'm going to change it. I'm going to grab that one, deselect that one. And there we go. I like it. Now unwrap tool. Bam, there it is. Job done. Job done. Okay. Now we need to orientate it within our scene. We have to ensure that this object is perfectly horizontal or perfectly vertical, okay? Because if you look at our checker pattern, that's the angle of the wood grain that's going to show up on this board. And last time I checked, wood grain doesn't run diagonally across the length of any board. It runs vertically, okay? Or, it kind of depends on the orientation of the board. However, either way, we need to orientate this piece so that it's either horizontal or vertical inside of our positive UV grid. All right, let's go do a couple more here. Let's do this guy. So this one is a true cube. How am I going to unwrap this? What do I need to establish first when doing cubes in conjunction with the unwrap tool? I like it. So we've got to do some analysis here. So here's the object in relationship to the rest of the mesh. For what? Yeah. Let's talk spatially here though. Where do I want my seam? On the front or the back of my model? Top back corner. I like it, because if we were to look at this object in the actual scene itself, we're really not going to be able to see that top back corner. Great place to have a seam. Okay? So I know I need to select that edge right there to get my seam, excuse me. But however, what else do I need here? Of the C's and the U's. Don't forget those C's and U's, okay? Those Charlies and uniforms, okay? There it is. There's my inverted C. And I'll have a friend down on the opposite end, okay? Now let's unwrap it real fast. Boom. And in one mouse click, we've gotten the entirety of that cube unwrapped inside of my scene itself, okay? Pretty great. What's the final step in this process? Rotate it. Absolutely. Let's just select those. We'll run orient pieces, and we're on our way. Let's do a couple more real fast, working our way around. This is a fast one over here. Let's grab that inside edge. That's the edge that we're not going to see. Grab some C's and U's here. Nice little pattern. Once you start looking for those C's and U's, you'll find that the process of UV mapping cubes really becomes quite easy, and it's not as challenging as one may think. Let's do maybe this one here. And it goes pretty fast, actually, once you kind of know what you're looking for. I say a lot of 3D modeling is really defining what patterns, or defining patterns inside of our scene. Okay? The UV Unwrap tool is going to allow us to easily and very quickly use those patterns to develop, here we go, to develop the orientation of our UVs inside of our map. All right. And last but certainly not least, certainly not least, let's grab just this guy here. Okay, once again, we've got to figure out where the seam's going to go. Top back corner is probably our good candidate. Even on polygons that have a slope in it, still want to do that C and U. All right, there it is. Okay, so let's go find a tiny texture real fast. Let's go find a tiny texture. I think I actually have one. I think I downloaded one from the web earlier that we can use to test our wood grain pattern. Now, when you're working with objects that are like stone or plaster or concrete or even bricks, we can use the checker pattern pretty easily to help define the correct proportion and scale of all of our objects to each other. Okay? When doing wood grain, however, we need to take this one step further. We need to get a wood grain pattern into the system as fast as humanly possible. Why? Why? That's it. To ensure that the grain is correctly orientated within the scene. That's what we're after here. Okay? Let me show you what I'm talking about. We have to define quickly the orientation of the grain pattern on each one of these boards. Let's add another image layer into the mix here. Load image, and here it is, wood rough. Okay. This board here is a perfect example of the problem that we have run into. Let's unhide these. And I'm just going to isolate my scene here by only having these boards drawn on my frame. Now, does this look right? Visually, from what you see over here on the right, does this look correct? No. What's wrong with it? The grain's going in the wrong way. This is a detail that we have to really kind of notice and get kind of established pretty early on. At this stage, I'm not so concerned about the proportions of the UV islands in relationship to each other. I need to just get their kind of, the grain pointed in the right way, okay, before I go any further. So luckily for us, this process is pretty easy. I just need to find the problem children. In this case, this is a problem. I select it in my 3D viewport. It automatically gets selected over here in my UV editor. And then I'm just going to rotate it 90 degrees. There it is. That looks better. Now the grain is going the way it should be going. So I got to hand tool these a little bit and get them all going in the right direction. If you don't do this, the illusion that you're going to create is just going to be wrong. It's going to look funky. It's never going to look right. It does require a little bit of effort, but as you can see, it's really not that bad. One thing, let me show you a trick here that I learned a long time ago. You can actually do a number of these all at the same time. Okay? Let's pretend that this is where you've placed your two UV islands onside your map. Now, I could do something like this. I can rotate them like that. Boom, 90 degrees. Now the wood grain pattern is where I need it to be on my actual object itself. What if I want to have these two UV islands kind of stay in their current location but rotate around their local kind of center point? This is kind of a cool little trick. We actually have an action center inside of Modo called local. And it's going to analyze whatever that we have selected, and it's going to try to rotate that component, those series of polygons, those items around their local bounding box. Check it out. Change my action center to local. And now when I rotate it, my tool handle shows up over here, but look what happens when I rotate them now. Great little trick to very, very quickly get things aligned where we need them to go. All right. Yeah. Yeah. So you're asking me, is there a benefit to having them all in separate pieces? Is it all one? Well, it's definitely easier to UV map. A lot easier to UV map. Okay. And in addition, it gives me some flexibility during the construction stage. I can use my snaps and precision tools to align these different pieces quickly to one another. So I think that's kind of where I'm going with this. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I think it just gives you a little bit more control. Yeah, it gives you a little bit more control. Polygonally, I may have 10 or 20 more polygons than I normally would have, but I think I get a little bit more control. Also, and this is actually an important thing to think about in the terms or through the lens of texturing. What we're doing here is kind of creating the beam structure of this house. Okay, if you look at it, this beam is sitting on top of these two posts as it really would out there in the real world, okay? I can see that the wood grain for this beam on the texture file itself is terminating down here at this cap on the end. So I kind of get the illusion of beams here, of true beams, just based on where and how far that wood grain pattern is traveling down the length of my polygon. So it gives me a little bit more control, faster to UV. I'm getting an illusion that's a little bit more realistic. So yeah, I like it. Doesn't have to be. Doesn't have to be. However, you would increase the number of polygons on your mesh by trying to make that whole, right? Yeah. So it's fine as is. Your polygonal count would go up if you'd made a hole there. So no one's ever going to see it, but that's all right. Wait, your count would go up? Would go up. Yeah, it would go up. Barely, but it would go up. Actually, I may have opened my mouth when I shouldn't have. Yeah, because if I did a loop slice on here, let's do a count of 2, mode of symmetry. There we go. Oh, yeah, I did open my mouth. No, I'm right. I'm absolutely right, because now I have 12 and 13 instead of 6. Yeah. However, you could, if you wanted to, go in. It's kind of bad modeling form, but you could go in, delete those edges, and just have kind of like n-gons there. It's not good form, but you can do it. It shouldn't. That's kind of why I think it's bad form, is that you're infusing unknown variables into the mix. I know some people who do this, and this is not something that I support, but it's out there. You see it every once in a while. Okay. In order to have an opening there, they'll disconnect all the polygons from each other. So they'll do something like this. They'll do Command X, Command V. Okay, because now I can go in and delete that edge, and it's not going to influence the rest of my mesh. That's a quad polygon. That's a quad polygon. However, this is the problem. They're physically disconnected from each other, and so I am not a supporter of said idea at all. So that's why I didn't have an opening there, because it increased the number of polygons that were going to show up on the beam. Yeah, and life's good. Life is good. All right, things are starting to look pretty snappy here. I love it. I don't know how. Looks like I got some UV. Oh, look, that's awesome. That's awesome. My wood grain pattern is being automatically applied to all the other UVs that are in this map, which are all these wood guys, and it looks kind of cool, actually. I like it. All right, anyways. All right, so let's continue talking about what we need to do for our wood grain pattern. So we understand the orientation that these UV islands need to be in order to get the grain flowing the right way. That's a big, big thing. Okay. Now we need to make sure that the wood grain looks appropriate to one another. Yeah. Can you say that again? Yeah, the bump map just needs to be identical to your diffuse texture map. If they're the same thing, the tiling system is going to continue to work. Okay, so now we need to make sure that all these UV islands are in proportion to each other. We can't forget this stage, right? Because if we have one beam that's bigger than another beam in our UV map, the illusion of our wood grain being thrown down onto our model is going to be funky and weird and different, okay? So like that. Now I have one beam where the illusion's really, really small, and then another beam where the illusion is very, very big, okay? So it's critical that we scale all of these UV islands to each other before we go any further, okay? All right, let's just do it real fast. And I'm going to kind of separate these out, and I want to show you a little technique here that I learned that really helps, okay? That really helps. All right, so let's turn off my wood beam, and we'll just use my little checker pattern here. Okay, so we have to work with this checker pattern or a checker pattern. It doesn't necessarily have to be this one. I like this one, though. It makes it easy for me to differentiate all the different pieces and the size of the squares, okay? Now, we need to make kind of like one master board here, okay? And let's see, I want to choose that one. This is going to be my master. I'm going to align all of my other UV islands to this one. Okay, because if I don't have a master, we're going to get caught in this catch-22 endless edit loop if we don't. So this is going to be my master, and I'm going to move and scale it around in my scene here. I want to make it much bigger so I can see more cubes flowing along that little beam. There we go. That's pretty good. I like that. I can see H08 very clearly over here. That's going to be helpful. And C08 clearly over here. That's also going to be helpful. All right, since this is my master, let's start aligning or scaling all these other UVs appropriately. I'm going to show you something that you promise you have to manage, okay? This is something that will come back and bite you if you forget that it's on, or actually that you forget that it's off, okay? I'm showing you a powerful thing here that's going to help in this process, but if you don't forget to turn it back on, it's not my fault, okay? If you get really confused as to what's happening in the computer, it's not my fault, okay? One of the more challenging things that we have to work with, I guess, in this stage of our pipeline is seeing the reproduction of our image map on the model clearly. When we have those polygons on the right selected, sometimes it kind of, that selection color gets in the way of me seeing the texture clearly. I don't want to see the selection on the right. It's imperative that it still be selected. I just don't want to see that selection color, and that's one of the viewport properties that we can establish. Okay, so if I go over here, hit the O key, check it out. Under the visibility section, we have a subsection or a subcommand called Show Selections. Only you can prevent forest fires. Okay, you are playing with matches here. You really are, because the moment you turn it off, check it out. It's not going to show you that those polygons are selected over there on the right, okay? This is something that I would only truly do at this stage. It's important that I see how my texture is being mapped onto my polygon. The only thing that I'm really working with is the UV island on the right. So technically, right now, these polygons are selected. We're just not viewing that orange selection color. Now I can go in and continue to adjust my UVs and get them aligned to one another without having to wonder if they're not be confused by the scale of these beams. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I am looking at details here, and if you look very closely, I am looking at the width of this cube in the relationship to the width of one of the cubes on my master beam. Okay, I'm doing this visually, and I'm just going to continue to scale it up until they're approximately the same size, and sometimes you get some weird reads. So if you just scale and move, and just get kind of close. Okay. Here's another great little trick. You know, really what we're doing here is we're moving our element along the V-axis. If you hold down the Control key and click on the slider, you get fine movements on those elements. Okay. That way, if you want to move things ever so slightly, you can. All right, that's close enough for me. That's really close. And it looks like the widths of each one of these cubes is very similar to each other. So now I know beyond any reasonable doubt that both of these UV islands are in the correct scale to each other. This guy and this guy are scaled correctly to each other. So when I apply my wood grain pattern, let's just turn the wood grain pattern back on. The wood grain is going to be the exact same size on both beams. Okay? On both beams. Let's keep going. Let me turn off my wood grain pattern. Let's move on to this beam, this one over here. All right. So same thing. I'm just going to make it big. I might have made it too big. Is this stupid? Yeah. Is this a waste of my time? Yup. Is this absolutely necessary for what we're doing? Yes, of course. It is absolutely necessary. Got to do it. This is part of the process. This is kind of the part of the process where I just kind of turn on my music. I go revisit Pandora for a minute, hang out, get everything dialed, and ensure that all of my UV maps are aligned to each other. Or excuse me, all of my UV islands are aligned to each other correctly. And I'm just trying to get all of the cubes the correct and appropriate scale. Takes some time, but as Waddell and I were mentioning earlier, you only got to do it once. This, in many ways, is the difference between a professional, and an amateur. If you can do this across the entirety of your entire model, that's good English, isn't it? I done got me an education. If you can do this across all of the UVs on your model, mission accomplished. It's going to make the accuracy of your tiling textures skyrocket. It's going to make the believability of your object skyrocket. Is it a lot of monkey work? Yeah. Is it grunt work? Faux show. It is, okay? This here is why there are a couple hundred 3D modelers on the production of these really big games, is that we have to do this. There's not an automated process for the, to generate all these UVs quickly for us at this level of accuracy. We have to hand tool it. It goes quick, though, once you start working on it, okay? This really, to do I remember when I did the UV maps for this object, this took me about 45 minutes to do. So it's not like hours and hours and hours and hours. Once you know the patterns, once you know the workflow, it goes pretty quick, okay? But you can't forget to do it. Got to do it, got to do it, got to do it, got to do it. All right, I got one more beam, and then we'll call it quits. There it is. That's close enough. And it doesn't have to be exact, precise. If you can get within 5% of what the result should look like, that's good enough for me. All right. There it is. Now, if we turn our tiling texture back on, the illusion is complete. Mission accomplished. Mission accomplished. Okay. Come on in, Tomoka. You're doing well. All right. Okay, questions on the workflow that we've described so far. So after you generate the UVs, what's the next step? What do you mean by that? Okay, well, before we even get to figuring out what texture is going to go on these polygons, what do we have to do to the UVs? Yeah, we have to triple check them. We have to make sure that they're scaled to each other so that when we apply a tiling texture to them, we get the results that we want. Okay? It's important that that one tiling texture be mapped correctly across all of the polygons that's connected to it. Okay? The only way to do that is to kind of go in and hand tool it a little bit. Scale them individually and just keep going. Okay. All right. There are certain times, however, when we want our UVs to have a different size and scale. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I've already made the UVs for my chimney here. There we go. And I'm just going to isolate this real quick. There it is. Okay. All right, so if you look at the UVs here, you can definitely see that the size of my chimney is much, much smaller than the size of what I would call, with the hearth of my chimney, the inside of my chimney. And I want to look at a couple different ideas here so that we can begin to illustrate some of the things that we need to consider when approaching the size of our UVs. Because remember, the size of our UVs are going to have a direct relationship to the size of all the features and the details of the photographs that we're going to be putting on them. Okay? Let's illustrate this for a second. I want to throw both of these into their own material. Both of these two sections here, because or actually, let's just put them in the same material. So let's put this in a material called chimney. There we go. And shoot, you know what we're going to do for good old chimney here? I think we're going to recycle that rounded brick material, or excuse me, that rounded brick texture that we were working with before. And let's ensure that the texture locator is directing it towards the correct UV, and it's not. All right. Pretty epically bad. Horrible. So what do I need to do here to my UVs? Let's talk about the base of the chimney first, and then we'll start localizing our issues by exploring how the hearth is going to be created. So what do I need to do? Just look at how the texture map, the image map, is being applied to the surface of my chimney. I like it. Which piece? Got a 50-50 shot at it. I like your odds, though. Just based on what you can see on my map. Which one? The left one or the right one?
The left one.
Left one, good. Absolutely, because that's the UV information that describes the base of the chimney. Good. So if we were to scale it, and let's make it much smaller. Oh, much bigger, excuse me. I always do that. Takes me about 8 or 9 tries. So now what I'm looking at doing here is just trying to figure out the size and scale of the details of the image as it's being mapped across the surface of my geometry. Okay? I'm not looking or worrying about the size of my UVs, don't care. I'm just trying to figure out how big I want all these rocks to show up across my chimney, and that looks pretty cool. I'm happy with that. Okay? However, we get in close here, kind of makes sense that along the base of the chimney, the rocks kind of be big and, kind of like little small little boulders, right? Because what they're constructing here, it's a big shape, so it makes sense that we use big boulders. But on the inside of the hearth, what should we have? Small boulders. Small boulders. We're still using the exact same texture file. The exact same image is going to influence 2 different areas differently just based on the size of their UV island. Okay? Let's do it real fast. Just moving it out of the way so I can select it. Now I know from that last bit that I really need to make this quite big. Okay? Yeah, there we go. I'm liking that. Maybe it's too big. There we go. Cool. Digging it. Now, if we look at what's been created, we're starting to create a more compelling illusion that this hearth has been created with the same type of river rock or whatever it is, but just much smaller versions of it. The size of our UVs are going to determine how large or small the texture is going to appear across the geometry of our surface. Okay? The surface of our geometry, said that backwards. I apologize. Okay? It makes it an incredibly powerful system. Because what we're fundamentally doing here is that we're allowing the materials inside of our shader tree to be responsible for how the object is going to look, not those Photoshop textures anymore. Okay? We're not having one Photoshop texture that has, certain UV islands that look like brick, other UV islands that look like stone, other UV islands that look like wood. Now we're having one image map that's just wood, and then that wood texture is being blasted to different polygons within our scene. Okay? And the results are pretty great. The results are really great, actually. We wouldn't get this level of quality if we were using that same traditional Photoshop-centric production pipeline that we were working with before, right? We saw that at the beginning of class. That one wood beam looked horrible, looked really, really bad. Very blurry, artifacty, low resolution. The tiling texture method, we get high quality results quickly. Yeah, go ahead.
So is that meaning is that we can having a separate UV for, like for example, the wall and then the wood panel and then let's say the stone.
It doesn't necessarily have to be in a separate UV map. They can all be in the same UVs. The materials in the shader tree are separating out which polygons are responsible for what.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and that's why we can have all of our UVs be in the center of our scene. If you look at my mess, okay, if I was to unhide all of this, check it out. Look at all the overlapping UVs here. I don't care because the materials are responsible for determining what shows up on the polygons, not the texture like we had earlier. Okay, the material is kind of in the driver's seat here. The material separates everything out, not the texture like we were doing before. Okay. Seen the benefits? Seen the benefits? Seen the benefits? Okay, let's take it one step further. Control. Often we want to be able to control our textures, okay? And specifically the placement of details of certain textures on certain objects, okay? Let me show you what I'm talking about. Okay, let's go back. And I'm going to grab all of these guys and assign them to the walls material. There we go. Oh, those are the wrong ones. Let me hit undo. I wanted these guys. There we go. Aha, okay, great. Let's unhide the rest of my scene. And let's go find on CG Textures a really great tiny texture for some plaster. I remember seeing this somewhere. Because I want the top area to be kind of like this old Englishy style plaster. Maybe a little bit of worn out, like stuff like this. Really great. Let's just check out the damaged one. Okay, this is cool. Look at this. This is kind of a compelling texture file. I like this because it's got some lovely weathering on. And then we have some kind of brick pattern towards the bottom. Interesting. I like that. It may be extreme. Okay, let's download it and take a look at how we can use that texture file inside of our system. We load in that image map. Go find it real fast. Oh, did I not download it? Yeah, no, oh, now it's, must not have clicked on it. Go. All right. Okay. Let's take a look see here. Now, it looks like in my earlier version, I didn't have any of these elements scaled to each other. So let's just do it real fast. There we go. And I like that move and sew method. It's a fast way to get all the UVs proportionally where they need to be, okay? But I'm still really not that happy with the way the texture is showing up across my UVs, okay? Or excuse me, across my geometry. These bricks here, they seem ginormous in comparison to the size of the windows. So I need to change the scale of my UVs to get really what I'm after here. There we go. Aha, okay. So we got to be careful. We got to be careful in this, okay? Problem. What is my problem? It's tiling. It's tiling, okay? It's stamping it. It's doing exactly what we want it to do, or what we expect it to be doing, right? It's repeating that tiling texture both horizontally, and horizontally looks awesome, right? It's also going to do it vertically. And I've scaled, I've been using my eyeballs, and I kind of want, I like it, the little rock pattern in there, kind of right around that size, but you can see that vertically, big issues. So what are we to do? Let's troubleshoot this, okay? We can't change the texture, okay? We fundamentally can't change the texture, right? Because it's a tiling texture. The moment we take the texture file over into Photoshop, it's gone. It's no longer going to repeat. We'll see the seams. So what are we to do? Change the UVs, okay? We got to alter the UVs to get the illusion that we want, okay? Let me show you what I'm talking about here. Okay. So I'm going to grab these guys, and I'm going to move them up and down inside of my UV space to get the illusion that I want, okay? I'm looking at the bottom here. Something kind of like that. There we go. I'm happy with that. But the tops, that's no good. Okay? Top's no good. So here's what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to physically go in and start messing with the size of our UVs. I'm just moving them down and getting that. Okay? Are we stretching the texture? Yeah, a little bit. Okay, but we have to in order to get the illusion that we're after in this particular situation. A lot of times people go, "Oh, it's stretching. I think it looks bad." No, you think it looks bad because you know what the original texture looks like, right? An audience member who comes up to this object for the first time, they don't know what this looks like. That looks perfect to them because they don't have that point of comparison. And in reality, I think it looks pretty darn good. Okay, I think it's really darn good. But these are the little things that we have to start really understanding and looking at while we're at the UVing stage, okay? We want to be able to see how the texture is mapped onto our object and what we need to do to the UVs to get correct placement of that texture file across the surface of my geometry, okay? Make sense? Okay, all right. Because remember, all of this is going into a game engine starting next week. This entire material network that we spent crafting today is going to be exported. What we have in the shader tree is going to show up in Unity. We don't get to mess around with UVs over in Unity. We don't get to mess around with texture locators. There are no texture locators in Unity. The only thing we have are UV maps. That's why we have to have UV maps here in Modo, and why the placement and the scale and the orientation of the UV maps need to be perfect. Because when we send it over into the game engine, we get no control over it at that point. Okay? It's a scary environment to work with because, you know, if there's a problem in our scene here in Modo, I can just go fix that problem, right? I can go grab some edges, some polygons, I can remap things. I'm in the driver's seat. The moment we send it over into another app like Unity, I'm not so much in the driver's seat anymore. Okay? Questions? Yes, sir. No Photoshop. Very large objects. Very large objects. I know the comment that a lot of people have is like, wow, what about all those lovely like ambient occlusion stuff that we were getting? What about grime and dirt and really adding character to this? You can do that. We're going to have that conversation in 426. Okay? You'll see a little bit of it here in a couple weeks. We're going to talk about light mapping in Unity, which will allow us to bake in soft shadows and continue to generate some information, some texture information that will change the way our model is going to look. Very cool, by the way. Very, very cool. But for large objects, tiling textures, got to have it. Got to have it in order for everything to look good. Okay. I don't think I quite follow. What are you trying to do? You don't want to use Photoshop. Okay.
Like when I mean like adding like dirt and stuff from pictures.
Yeah, I think the built-in painting tools instead of Modo will get you in the right direction. It's not the best in its class. It's good at what it does. Best in class is a program called Mari. That's the best in class for interactive texture painting on the actual object itself. Something that we would use for props and set pieces in the game world. For feature film world, in the feature film world, we can have as many UV maps as we want. We have as many textures as we want. We can have, we can have it dominate as much of our RAM as we want. The game world, we have to massage it a little bit, right? This tiling texture workflow allows us to get the high quality resolution of our photographs without having we kind of give a little bit of control away, but what we get is something that looks a lot more cleaner. Okay. So to answer your question, for the game world, kinda. And things are changing in the game world pretty rapidly too. It's a frustrating environment to operate within because the technology changes so quickly.
Question this, maybe confused a little bit, but what about the future film? It's like still going to be using this technique?
Absolutely. Yeah,
yeah?
Absolutely.
They're not using Photoshop?
Oh, they're using Photoshop.
Depends?
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of depends on the studio and the artist. I think Photoshop is never going to go away.
Yeah.
Popped in my mind. Substance Designer, Austin, is probably the software that you want to look at. Substance Designer, it's a new app. It's only been on the market for a couple years. And what it allows you to do is take this tiling texture idea to the nth level, where you can do some texture painting, but also a lot of tiling network stuff like we've been doing in here. It's very cool. I'm a big fan of it. I have a demo version of it on my laptop, and it's awesome. It's really cool. It's really cool. It's called Substance Designer. And it's made by a company called Algorithmic. They're really, really neat. I like Algorithmic. Let me just go to the page so you guys have a point of reference. And I have no idea. Substance Designer. Here we go. And FYI, there's a plugin for Modo. Woo! Which they just released. Oh, come on. Do they not have the Algorithmic site listed? They have the forum. The guys down at Algorithmic are redonkulous. Incredibly smart. Here we go. Substance Designer, oh, they've updated it 3.3.7. So what this allows you to do is to do kind of like procedurally based tiling textures and a little bit of texture painting all thrown into one. Okay, it's really rad. It's really rad, actually. You can do characters, you can paint on stuff. Like, for example, the skin of Mr. Grumpy here, or even just this weapon, all done through Substance Designer. Okay, all done through Substance Designer. It's pretty rad. Their baking system inside of Substance Designer is amazing. It's probably the best baking engine I've worked with. It's the best way to bring in a high poly object, a low poly object, and bake between them and get really accurate normal maps. It's great. Very strong.
So, speaking of UV maps, like, which ones is better, using Photoshop or using this software?
Yeah, I don't think there's a better. I think there's just, it just depends. It just depends. Of course, the Substance guys will say their way is better. And in many ways it is. In many ways, I think Substance is really the direction that we're headed in. Is this something that I would show beginners? No, absolutely not. Which is why we really don't talk about it here, because everything in Substance is node-based, okay? There are no layers. There's just an order of operations that the computer is following through. And it's the quality and the results are amazing, but it's not for beginners. Yeah. And that's command line. That's actually command line. You can actually see the node-based editor down here. This is what it looks like. This is kind of a graphical representation of what we were talking about in class on Friday, that command line driven interface. It's neat. You can get a lot of really powerful results on it. Here, I think they actually have a small little video demonstration of what Substance Designer looks like. Let's see, where was it? Oh, here we go. Using UVs, okay? They're not going into Photoshop and painting on those UVs like we were in the past, okay? They're applying general tiling textures with some parameters thrown in there to give you the results that you want. It's cool. It's very, 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 very cool. Okay? I like the Substance Designer. Pure, that's all it does. That's all it does. It's a one-trick. Yeah, they had a cheaper version, by the way. They had a cheaper version for $150. I came really close to finding it. That's the thing. Yeah, they're making the relationship with Photoshop much stronger, because at times, and you saw that at the very end, at times you want to go in and be able to paint some grime in some certain areas and stuff. So there's always going to be that need and desire in the prop level of texturing. Okay.
What is that the network of,
yeah.
so those are the nodes?
Those are the nodes. Yeah. Those are the nodes. Right. So, for example, and let me just kind of prototype this on the board so everyone kind of gets a gist as to what a node-based environment looks like. Okay. So instead of hitting File Open in Photoshop, you have an input node. Okay. You drop the input node, and the purpose of that input node is just to open a file. That's all it's doing, the input node. The information that the input node captures, your file, is then sent to the next step of the operation. Okay? Maybe we want to make this texture file black and white, so we can make a bump map out of it. Well, this next node is going to be the hue saturation node. Okay? Hue saturation, and its sole purpose is just to make it black and white. Okay? Once you're done with that, maybe we need to export it and save it out into a number of different formats so that we can load it in quickly into a number of different applications. Okay? So from this entire process here, we have a number of export nodes. Each export node is going to save our texture file into a different format. Okay? So each one's going to get the output of the hue saturation. This could be like PNG. Maybe we need a JPEG for our art director. And of course, maybe we want a Photoshop document for archival later. Okay? So we can generate all three of those different formats at the exact same time. And they're going to be identical to each other because they're all stemming from that last step of the node. However, what if I wanted to go back in? Maybe my art director gave me some feedback and said, Pat, I love what you're doing, but you need to make your bump map more contrasty. Well, I don't have to go back and redo anything. I just have to add in another step here. Maybe this is like our levels node, and I remove this part of the connection. Okay, I go whoop, whoop, like that. Hit export. Everything fires back out into its all three file formats at the end. Okay. Kinda, yeah, kinda like layers. Kind of like layers. This is a very, very, very simple rudimentary example of how nodes can be applied. As you can see from the node structure up there on the screen, you can do some pretty crazy complex things quickly. Okay, and it just gives you a lot of control, and I mean a tremendous amount of control. Okay. I think they do. I'm not 100% sure. I think there's Wes McDermott 3D Ninja, I think has some substance training out there on the market. Yeah, do some research on it. I want to say I saw something from him that talks about the basics. I think Algorithmic has a free tutorial about version 3 of their app, not the most recent 3.7, but version 3. So there are some learning resources out there that will help you along. It's really cool. They've also just established a Modo plugin, which is great because now we can use Substance to texture all of our objects, and then we can send that information directly over to our shader tree in Modo, and it's very cool. It's tasty. It's awesome. Good times. Substance is becoming a major player. I like Substance. If we had another 3 or 4 more courses in this program, I think Substance would be included in that mix because I know it's we're limited just by the scope here. We really are. It's good stuff though. Check it out. This is one of those apps that if you're really trying to get into the game world, Substance should be on your list because it's changing the way texture artists are approaching the application of image maps to their objects. Film, absolutely. I do the same thing for film. Because it integrates directly into Modo, also goes out into Maya. Those are the 2 apps that they directly support through first-party plugins. It is perfect for films. Perfect for films. It really is. It's in many ways, it's kind of trying to replace the Photoshop-centric way of creating textures. And I like it because Photoshop has become bloated with features that I just don't use. And it's getting slower and slower and slower. And this is a neat way to work. I like it a lot. I wish we had the time and the money to really talk about Substance more in this class, or just in this program, because it's changing things for sure. It's good times. Is Photoshop ever going to go away? Nope. It's never going to leave. But there's other stuff out there that's going to kind of supplement that workflow. Yeah, it's a good app. Good app. All right. Questions. Oh, Substance video again. Wait, is it me? Oh, sorry. All right. Okay, so I think we've covered what I needed to cover today. Remember, materials, that's how we're going to separate out all of these elements from one another inside of our scene. Okay? In the past, we've just been relying upon one material and one texture map to produce all of the texture information for our object. Now we're going to have maybe 8 or 9. 8 or 9 materials. It's kind of dependent on your scene. For my guy, I would probably have 8 or 9 materials applied to this with 8 or 9 tiny textures that would determine how the end result of my little house is going to look. Okay? Questions? All right, we've got about 45 minutes left in class. Let's use this time to begin texturing our forge. Okay? I know firsthand how hard it is to texture large objects, and you're just going to need some time. There's no lab assignment today. You just need to texture your forge. You need to turn in a final textured version of your forge to the Dropbox next week. Okay? So we walk away from our blacksmith shop next week. We're not done with it yet, but we're going to be done with the modeling and texturing of it. Okay? The blacksmith shop in its conclusion is going to be the project that you're going to use to learn how to get stuff over into Unity. So what we make here in Modo is going to be sent to Unity next week. After next week, we almost completely transition to working in Unity and understanding the Unity system for the rest of the semester. I'm really not going to talk about modeling in Modo anymore this semester, so this is kind of it. This is the last conversation that's going to be Modo-centric. Everything else going forward is going to be all about the good old Unity. Questions? All right, let's get to work. Yes, sir.
So for this method, you just leave the UV islands like that?
Yeah, you can, because the material is responsible for placing the texture on the polygons. Okay, so we can have them overlapping. We can have them outside the UV quadrant. That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's really great. In some ways, it's easier. Other ways, it's kind of harder.